And George Stephanopoulos says, and many deaths, Donald Trump doesn't have that normal human instinct, normal politician instinct to correct it, whether because it needed correcting or whether because it's galling to say that the policy was for hundreds of thousands of people to die. But it's clear from that clip that even if we hadn't had a vaccine, the White House and the president and his advisors, as reported in these emails at Politico, have always supported letting the virus run rampant. And when you see communities torn apart with protesters outside the homes of sometimes volunteers who serve on these boards, the reason can always be traced down to a worldview that was promoted by Donald Trump.
Well, that's exactly right. And in certain factions of the West Wing, there was always this idea and this push for herd immunity, which is a very dangerous, experts would argue, and certainly controversial concept. There's that great reporting by Politico. We at the Post reported a couple months ago that Scott Atlas was privately pushing herd immunity. And it's worth noting that the White House publicly lied about it. They just straight up lied. But there was something about this idea of herd immunity that was very appealing to Donald Trump, because in his mind, it meant that he sort of didn't have to really deal with and grapple with the problem. This is a president who, as you've reported, we've all talked about, wanted sort of a tweak cure, to be able to say it would miraculously go away and have that be so. And he believed that herd immunity was the closest to solving the problems of the virus. The problem, of course, is that while on the whole, and the president was hearing, and this is true, that the mortality rate is not that high for non-vulnerable populations, there are people, young athletes, 30-year-old mothers of three who get the virus and die. And that's why this theory was so dangerous and controversial.
I mean, just to put a finer point on what Ashley Parker just said, John Heilemann, if Donald Trump weren't the leader of the country, herd immunity might have cost him his life or brought with it very severe and lasting health consequences. Chris Christie was hospitalized for. I mean, herd immunity as a strategy could have killed people close to this president, including the president. It's insane.
Yeah, hi, Nicole. Good to see you again here on this snow day. As always, a pleasure. I want to go a little further than Ashley, and I think you can actually say something building on what both of you have just said. First of all, the herd immunity was the policy. It's not like they thought about herd immunity or contemplated herd immunity and didn't pursue it. When Donald Trump reopened the country, despite all the warnings that he was given, all the things the public health experts said would happen if we reopened in too rapid a fashion, that was the pursuing, in fact, if not name, the policy of herd immunity. And it was an ex post facto rationalization for what was fundamentally a political strategy. He would have said it was an economic strategy. But what do we know about how Donald Trump, he was driving him in the course of 2020? Again, Ashley made this point, but didn't go quite as far as I would, which is to say, Donald Trump was sitting through all of 2020, recognizing that what he thought was going to be his path to reelection, which was an economy he was very proud of, an economy that was solid, not as extravagantly great as he claimed, but was solid, that he had a financial advantage, he had a Democratic field that was for a long period of time in disarray, and he had a strong economy. That was all snatched away from him by COVID. And all he was thinking about throughout the year was, how do I get this economy back? The only way for me to win this election is to get the economy back. And from there, he adopted the only policy that would allow him to rationalize reopening the economy when the dangers for public health were so great. Herd immunity was the path to saying, to let her rip, reopen the country. Yeah. And that was, for Trump, a political strategy. And I think it's just very clear. And we saw this throughout. Many public health experts said something this is not an insight of mine. I remember throughout this whole 9-month period listening to public health experts saying, as our friend Rachel Maddow does, watch what they're doing, not what they're saying. And what Trump was saying was he didn't want to say the words herd immunity, as he sort of came close with Stephanopoulos there. But what they were doing was pursuing a herd immunity strategy. And I think what we're now learning is that just that the socialization of that within the administration, calling it what it really was all along, was just much more widespread than we were led to believe at the time. But none of it should be surprising, because it's exactly what they did when they reopened the economy in the kind of flagrant way that they did in the summer and then into the fall. And as part of a byproduct that created this culture war, which is really still having these incredibly deleterious effects that you started the show talking about, where public health has become an ideological, political fight rather than what it should be.
Yeah, and that is very much what's playing out, Dr. Padilla. We have resignations now from these, I imagine, thankless posts in Idaho. As I mentioned, that mask mandate failed. That was after one of the members of the board was caught in the meeting on Zoom saying she had to race home because her 12-year-old son was home alone, and there were protesters outside of her house. In Detroit, the Detroit Free Press reports that they're chanting "Open up now" outside the home of the Michigan health director, a man named Robert Gordon. I want to ask you, though, Dr. Padilla, if you think that what Donald Trump did by advocating, these are some of the protests, the mass protests and public health protests, if by advocating herd immunity, he gave the sort of imprimatur of the President of the United States saying this is a good strategy, if you think that's what these public health officials at a state and local level are still contending with, that some people still subscribe to it. And I think John's right. It was never the official policy, but it was certainly the off-book policy. While Dr. Birx and Tony Fauci stood at that podium and advocated public health measures like mask wearing and social distancing, Donald Trump's strategy was what John Heilemann said: let it rip. Masks aren't necessary. Hydroxychloroquine will save you. If I can survive, anyone can. I mean, is that what the public health officials are contending with, that people simply still don't believe how dangerous and deadly COVID is?
Yeah, Nicole, I'm just going to highlight, underscore, and circle everything both you and John just said, because this was one of the major weaknesses in our pandemic response that we actually didn't anticipate. The idea that there will be this high level at the very top, this politicization of this pandemic, and it had two impacts, right? When you have the highest echelons of power sort of in actions or even in words at some points push this strategy. There was a study out in Science magazine that showed that, again, partisanship was a huge part of what divides or decides people's actions in the face of this pandemic, whether or not they follow all the public health measures that we've been talking about. So it had two impacts. One, it created this division within our population that basically had, a de facto part of the population aiming for herd immunity and the other actually following, the requirements. The other was that it created enemies out of public health leaders, experts, right? Because now you have people who are telling you, no, these are important factors, but you're hearing from the very top that it's not. And so there was another report that I saw that 1 in 8 Americans live in communities where they had a public health expert or a staff member retire or be fired because they were overwhelmed with what's going on, and the antagonism that's coming from the public. And all of that has led to where we are right now. They wanted, there were groups and, people within the Trump administration who wanted Americans to get infected. Well, this is what happens when Americans get infected, because young or old, a portion of all those infected end up in the hospitals, and a portion of those pass away. And the young may not always get hospitalized or may not always get sick, but they live with people who are vulnerable, who are older, and they work with them. This was always going to be the logical conclusion. And here is where we're at the end of this, with this health crisis that's just devastating our country, just months before we could potentially achieve vaccine-induced herd immunity.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.